Hello, everybody. It's great to see such strong attendance for this event. I know it's been long anticipated, much talked about around the community. So today we're going to be talking about migrating to flow, and I'm sure you've heard those three words over and over. So we will be running through three tools that you can use to migrate to flow. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So please keep posting your questions throughout. I'll be taking note of questions and then compiling them in a logical order for the right person to answer. And also in the Q&A, we'll have a special bonus for you. This session is being recorded and it will be posted straight away to our YouTube channel, the Salesforce Ben YouTube channel. So you don't have to worry, if you miss something, all the details will be there for you. So yes, ever since Salesforce announced they were retiring workflow rules, which have been around for forever really, and Process Builder in favor of flows, there's been this almost big question on everyone's mind. How do I do it? What should I do first? And it's really not as simple as it may sound from the outside. It's not a simple click a button and you'll migrate to flow. There's a lot of considerations that need to be taken and a few approaches as we're about to explore. But ultimately, it's the business's automation needs that need to be respected. So hopefully after this talk, you'll be equipped with some considerations to take into your own organization. Next slide, please. So I'm Lucy Maslon. I head up operations at Salesforce Ben and been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 8 years and have used workflows, Process Builder and flows myself. It's great to see the evolution of that. But I'm going to stop talking about flows because there are two people here with me who are much better equipped to talk about flow, two of the brightest sparks in the community when it comes to flow. I've even been chatting with both of them over the past few months and giving them some thorny questions. So you are in safe hands. Pablo, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Pablo. I'm in Dublin, Ireland. I'm from Salto and also from Happy Soup, which is one of the tools that we're going to be demoing today that's going to help you a lot in your journey to migrate into flows. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for joining us. And Tim?
G'day, I'm Tim Combridge. I'm the Managing Director over at Force Mastery. Similarly, I could talk about flows for days and days on end, but I have been told that we have a time limit today, so I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Been working in the Salesforce industry now for probably 6-ish years, starting to lose track. And yeah, flows was one of the big sort of tools back in the early days that really got me hooked and has been my sort of passion on the platform ever since.
Yeah, thank you both for joining. Should we dive in?
Beautiful. Alrighty, I might sort of kick off and talk a little bit about the history of legacy automation and flows and the tools that sort of they exist today, but they won't very soon. And those are sort of workflow rules and processes or process builder. So it's official now. Workflow rules and processor both are being retired. So there's a timeline. Salesforce has a plan as to when they will be getting rid of these tools. The key points along that timeline, however, are that there'll be no new workflow rules created after Winter 23, which is coming up in October, so only a few months now. And then you won't be able to create any new processes early in 2023. So in February 2023, processes and process builder, you'll no longer be able to create new ones. So the end of support, in other words, end of life, complete retirement of these tools is estimated to be about 2025. Salesforce does have an entire sort of timeline and roadmap as to when that will be, which we'll show in a second. But when is the time for you to act, whether that's be to learn flows or to start migrating or to start assessing your environment and your org's workflow rules and processes and just how your automations are built, why they were built, what they do, what they need to do. When's the time to act on that? The time is now. So do you mind, Pablo, so here we go. This is the retirement timeline talking about workflow rules and process builder. We can see here we're currently, we've just sort of dropped summer 22. So that's, we're sort of partway through that release now. So we've got entry condition support. We've got the new Migrate to Flow tool, which supports workflow rules. It does not yet support process builder. That is coming. And you can see some of the very next thing, the very next thing to happen is the ability to create new workflow rules is going to be turned off with the Winter 23 release, which is coming later this year. And you'll be able to access this recording afterwards and sort of have a look through that timeline in greater detail and see each of those points. But like I said, so the key points there is workflow rules are being turned off in Winter 23. We can see over a little bit further to the right, so they're turning off the ability to create new processes in the Spring 23 release in February 23, and then estimated end of life is 2025. So a few years yet, but again, the time to act is now. So the next slide that we're going to be talking about here, and this is a question that comes up all the time, every time I talk about flows and every time I talk about the migration from workflow rules and processes to flow, the number one question is how many flows should we be aiming for per object? So with Apex and with processes, in the past, the goal has been always just keep a single trigger or a single process per object. We've sort of identified in the past that the rule of 3 here was the best way to go about it. So that's one before create and update, one after create and update, and then one, that should say after delete. So all functionality is on a single canvas. There are pros and cons to this, which we'll sort of go into in a bit more detail. Then probably the best option, particularly for businesses on essentials and professional editions of Salesforce, where you have a limit of 5 flows per org as it is, whether they're active or not. There is a different approach. So there's 2, I suppose, main approaches when you are building out your record triggered flows inside of Salesforce. This applies to record triggered flows. Another question is, what about scheduled triggered? What about screen flows? Doesn't apply here. We're just talking record triggered flows. Okay, so the other option is you can create multiple smaller flows and use the new entry criteria functionality that was highlighted on the last slide. So what you can do is you can basically put a filter on the records that will trigger the flow. So instead of just all accounts that are created or updated, you can say all accounts that are created or updated and the type value is changed or something like that. And you can handle the subset of automation that way. There's, like I said, there's pros and cons to option 1 and option 2. With option 2, now that you can control your trigger order with Flow Trigger Explorer, that was something you couldn't previously do. So your flows would just fire, if you had multiple per object, they just fire in any old order. Now with the Flow Trigger Explorer and the Flow Trigger Order, you can actually dictate the order in which they are to be executed. If you build them using option 2, so multiple smaller flows, they will lead to significant performance improvements because, again, you're only loading the flow in the scenarios where it makes sense to do so rather than every single time any record of that object is created or updated or deleted. So, the flow is sort of only loaded into memory when it's required. And this is an absolute must for Salesforce orgs with a large volume of data. So if your data, if you've got millions of records and they're constantly being edited, you don't want your flows to be constantly loaded into the memory. Okay. So again, these are the 2 key options. Option 1 again is rule of 3. So per object, you'd have 1 before create and update, 1 after create and update, and 1 to handle deletions. And option 2 is now you can create multiple smaller flows to handle individual tasks and only be loaded in when required. Again, option 1 is probably the best option for essentials and professional editions. Option 2 is probably better for orgs with large data volumes, and other orgs, you kind of got a bit of a flexibility here. But again, like we said at the beginning, and we talk about it a little bit more on the next slide, ultimately the goal is that you, as a business, you want to be able to assess and identify what are your priorities as a business. Pablo, do you mind just switching to the next slide for me, please? There we go. So yeah, should I be using option 1 or option 2 in my org? Again, ultimately that depends, really. So both approaches are valid, but as a business, you need to consider your functional and technical requirements and restraints, and build and stick to a flow design strategy. Which basically is a design process that a design strategy that you would stick to across the board. Beautiful. The next thing we're going to talk about now is, and this is something we sort of talked about leading up to this, we're going to be talking about 3 free tools that you can use to make your migration to Flow a little bit easier. So the first one we all kind of know about at a high level, which was released very recently by Salesforce themselves. Again, the Migrate to Flow tool that was released supports workflow rule for now. The ability to migrate process builder is coming. And that's in the spring 22, as you know, it's supposed to be in spring 22 so far. We'll see what happens there. Then we talk about using the rebuild and enhance approach. So rather than sort of just a click to sort of create one flow per workflow rule, you sort of assess your flows using the rebuild and enhance model and build them again to be the best possible version of those automations for your business today and for what your business needs today. And that's using Happy Soup's workflow migration info tool. And you can also option 3 there, you can understand your complex flows with Salto's free product as well. Pablo, I might hand over to you now to go through those 3 options and sort of compare them and how they work.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so the first tool that we're going to look at here is the workflow migration tool from Salesforce. So the way this works is when you go to the workflow page on your org, you're going to have this new section here called Migrate Workflows to Flows. So then if you click on this, you're going to get a list of all your workflows, and it's actually pretty simple. You just click on one of them here, and then you go migrate to Flow, and that's it. I was actually surprised how quick it was. Then if you open this up, you'll see a flow that is really a one-to-one mapping of the original workflow rule. Now, my initial reaction to this was that it wasn't too great because it's literally just migrating it, in a one-to-one fashion, and you don't really get the opportunity to maybe combine some workflows. But actually, I've changed my mind because I've seen there's a lot of value in migrating your workflows in this way. For example, if we go back to the original workflow here, we can see that the workflow is using a formula as the rule criteria, and then the field update is also using a formula as the value to update. Now, creating a flow that does exactly the same may not be too straightforward. Like if you're not used to flows, you may actually not know how to go up about it. How do you create a formula as the criteria, and then how do you use a formula as the update on the field? So the cool thing is that when you migrate this to a flow, Salesforce is going to do all that conversion for you, and then you can use this flow to actually learn what is the process of taking a workflow and converting it into a flow. So for example, if I go here to the criteria, I can see how Salesforce translated that workflow formula into a flow formula, which is not exactly the same. It's a little different because it has these brackets here, and it also has a record variable. But again, if I had never seen formulas in flows, this is actually a really good way to learn, not with some tutorial, but to learn from my real org that I'm used to. So I actually think it's a really cool approach. The second thing is that when it comes to the field update, you will also see how you can update the name of the account record, in this case using a value here, and this value turns out to be a formula. So again, being honest, I wouldn't have known just like that how to create this flow from that workflow. It would have taken me a bit of research. How do formulas work? How can I use a formula on a field update on a flow? So I think if you just create or if you just migrate your workflows to flows just like that, at least in a sandbox, it's actually a great exercise to start learning how flows work behind the scenes. Now, one of the challenges with this approach is that if you have, let's say, 100 workflows or even 50 workflows, you'll end up with 50 flows. And maybe that's not a problem, right? That's what we're talking about in this webinar, is that there is no right strategy. What works is what works for your company. But since flows tend to be a little bit more complicated, it could be an additional complexity to have 50 flows lying around it. So one of the things that you may want to do is take this as an opportunity to look at some of these workflows and think, can some of these workflows be actually combined into one flow that has different execution paths based on certain logic? Now, that sounds very nice, but it's actually really hard to do because, again, with 50 workflows, the only way to do that is to open up each workflow one by one and then look at the criteria, when the workflow runs, what is the evaluation criteria, then look at the actions, the field updates, and then trying to do a mental map of all that and trying to find the differences or the things that are similar. So it's actually really hard in practice to take multiple workflows and figure out which ones should be one flow. And so that's where Happy Soup comes in. So Happy Soup is at happysoup.io. This is a 100% free and open source tool that I own. So what you do is you log in with your Salesforce org. And once you're in, you go here to this workflow migration info. You select any of these options. Are actually the same. And essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to export all of our workflows from a given object in a flattened format. And I'll explain what that is. So you just go here, type in account. For example, it could be any other object or even a custom object. And then you just click export workflow info. So what that's going to do is it's going to then create a CSV file that you need to copy using the copy button here. And then what you can do is you can actually upload this into an Excel sheet. There's actually a video here on the app itself that shows you how to do that. Once you have this information in a sheet, this is what it looks like. And what I call this is like a flattened export of your workflows, because I'm not just exporting all the metadata of a flow, of a workflow. I'm pretty much flattening everything so that you can do a really good analysis. So for example, we have here the name of the workflow, the ID, if it's active, and then we can start looking at the criteria, whether the workflow has email alerts, does it have field updates, does it have tasks, does it have outbound messages, what about time-based actions. Then we can also look at what are all the fields being used in the criteria of the workflow. If the workflow sends, for example, an outbound message, I can also see what fields are being used in the action. If the workflow has field updates, we can also see what fields are being updated and to which value. So for example, here I see that this workflow is updating the name field to the value name plus text integration status, which is a formula. Then when it comes to email templates, I can see which email templates are being used, what emails are being sent, and any integration or endpoint URLs for outbound messages. So the cool thing is that once you have this here, if you add some filters on your sheet, you can do some really cool stuff. For example, you can say, show me all the workflow rules that have field updates and that don't have email alerts, right? And then, okay, you get these ones. Now, obviously, this is a tiny example, but in the real world, you can do any number of combination that you want, right? Show me the workflows rules that have email alerts and field updates and that are updated in this field, right? And maybe you'll find 10 of them, and maybe those 10 are a good candidate to combine or consolidate into a single flow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you then a real example. Looking at this sheet here, I can see on the field that is using the criteria that there are 3 workflows that are using the same field in the criteria integration status. So what this is again 3 workflow rules using the same field, but probably the condition is different. So that sounds like something I could actually put into a single flow with just different decisions or different paths based on the condition here. So what I would recommend then is once you identify your candidate workflows, in this case, these 3, go back to Salesforce and then convert all of them into an individual flow. So I did that for the first one here, right? When the status is, or when integration is new. Let's do it now for when the status is established. And then let's do it again for when the integration status is disconnected. And so now that you have all of these three, again, what you can do is you can start looking at them and start learning. Okay, how do they do things? What does the criteria look like? Okay, is it using a fast update or is it using a related records update? What does the update look like, right? So now you can really start learning from your own org, and you can look at all these three workflows and how they would look like in a flow. So once you do this, you really understand what are the different conditions that each workflow triggers on. And then what you can do is you can combine all of this into a single flow, which is what I've done here. So let me go back to my flow list. And using that exercise, I've been able to create this flow called integration status automation, which is a combination of all the three workflows. I don't know about you, but to me, this looks really nice. Being able to visualize your business process in this way, it's a lot easier to reason about. I can understand what are the different paths that will lead to certain execution. And now, again, it's just one flow to maintain. I no longer need to think about three workflows and what are the order in which they execute and all that, and in race conditions. This is just a lot easier to deal with. So I'm going to take a break there just for that to settle in. So once you have a flow like this, it's really good. But now you do have a little bit added complexity, because for some people it might be easier to reason about your tiny workflows. But now you have this big flow that does a lot of different things. Even if it's one business process, it can get actually really complex. So what I would recommend is then you need something to really understand what is going on in your flows. How are your flows built? What are the dependencies that your flows have? Where these flows are being used? Which fields are being used in those flows? And for that, we can use Salto's free tier. So this is Salto. So I'm going to be demoing the free tier today. This is also 100% free. So the way Salto works is it connects to your Salesforce environment and it downloads all the metadata, and we can then browse in a really easy to understand format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for that flow, the big one, which is called integration status automation. And here we go. And now what I'm seeing here is my flow metadata in a document-like format. So I can see, for example, all the decisions of my flow and all the rules. I can see all the assignments, any action calls for any subflows. So now what I can do, for example, is if I go back to this integration status here, let's say that I want to see where this field is being used across the flow, something that is not possible in the Salesforce UI. So I'm just going to copy this, drop it into the search here, and now I can start browsing my flow in this way. And so this is really good because now I can see that, okay, this field is being used as a condition where it is being evaluated against the value connection established. It's also being evaluated against the value disconnected. And it's also used in a formula. And if I go a few more there, then I can also see the field itself, which exists in the account object. And the cool thing is that from here, I don't need to go anywhere else. I can just click on the field here. And now I'm looking at the actual field itself. So I'm actually out of the flow. The flow is now on this other tab. And I can also see all the places where that field is being used, kind of like Happy Soup or the Where is this used button in Salesforce, except that I can see exactly where. I can open up the three flows that I created, and I can see exactly where that field is being used within those flows. So for example, I can click on this, and I'm going to be taken to the exact location within that flow where that field is used. So again, as your flows become more complex, I think you need a tool that helps you be able to do this kind of analysis to understand what's happening with your flows. And another side effect of this is that flows can be reused, right? Flows can be used as subflows for other flows. They can be used in Lightning Web Components. Non-screen flows can also be called from Apex classes. And Salesforce doesn't give us a way to see where those flows are being used. So if you want to maybe deprecate a flow or maybe combining with another one, it's really hard to understand if there's going to be impact somewhere else where that flow is being used. So I have this other flow here called flow used everywhere. So what I can do with Salto is I can just search for the flow name, and here we have it. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go over the content tab, and here I can see all the locations where that flow is being used. So I can see that it's used in a record action. I can see that it's being used by another flow as probably a subflow. And I can also see that it's being used by an Apex class right there. And I can even go further and see that it's being used by the JavaScript controller or a Aura component. So again, really easy way to understand what's happening with your flows, how they're being built. And for flows that are reusable, you can also see where they are being used. Everything that I've shown here works for pretty much any other metadata type. You can do the same for Apex classes, process builders, approval processes as well. And as I said, it's part of Salto's free tier, which is just free. So that's pretty much it with the demo. So now we can answer some questions. And just before the questions, we have two promotions here. So Tim, do you want to talk about your Flow Foundation course?
Yeah, definitely. Cheers, Pablo. That demo was fantastic too, and I saw a number of comments coming through saying how valuable those tools are going to be for some people. So that was really good. Thank you. Look, yeah, as you mentioned, the Ultimate Salesforce Flow Foundation course, sort of designed to teach you the basics of Salesforce Flow and give you a good understanding of not only the tool, how to use it, but also some best practices and a few examples in there as well. So if you've never used Salesforce Flow before, and you're sort of potentially very comfortable with workflow rules, process builder, or you're brand new to Salesforce automation as a whole, we've sort of designed the course to be, to be targeted for everyone. We go builder, where can you find it, all the way into, okay, in a scenario like this, what's the best way to approach this, how you should be designing out your flows before you build them, all that sort of thing. So if you follow that QR code there with your phone camera, you'll be sent to an article on the Salesforce Ben website where you'll be able to populate a form and get 25% off the course fee there. So you'll be able to learn and master the basics of Salesforce Flow. Back to you, Pablo, for the Salto one.
Yeah, so well, I already demoed Salto, right? So as I said, it's a 100% free product. And the reason I say 100% free is because a lot of times people ask, but is it really free? So yes, the part that I demoed, all about impact analysis and searching your metadata, it's 100% free. We do have other paid features, but everything that I've shown today is part of our free tier. So if you want to sign up for Salto's free tier, just use the QR code there on the screen. You just connect to your Salesforce application, and in a few minutes, you'll be able to do all the cool things that I've shown you. One other thing very quickly is I also put together a Salesforce Flow cheat sheet, which I think will go very nice with Teams course. So this is basically a document that has a lot of information on things that you should know about flows. For example, all the different flow types, when they run, some examples, some considerations as well. We also have stuff about record trigger flows, and then a breakdown of all the flow elements that can be used. So this is written by me and the Salto team. So I'm going to drop that into the chat if it's possible. But I think, again, if you use this along with Teams training, you're going to learn a lot about flows. So let me just go one slide back. And yeah, if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, that was magical. And just from everyone's reaction, it's going to save people so much time, a lot more control over the migration process as well. So yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, workflow rules, like I said, have been around forever. There's going to be so much automation, especially if you inherit an org. And this is a really good exercise for everyone to like really get a grip on what automation is going on in their org. So have a good clean out and consolidate. So yeah, really great stuff. So Tim, Pablo, I've just a question from me, first of all. When you migrated your first flow, what mistakes did you make? And what did you wish you knew before doing it?
I think for me, as I said earlier, is for some reason I kind of distrusted the Salesforce tool. I thought it was, as I said, kind of weird that it's just like a one-to-one mapping, and if you have 25 workflows, then you end up with 21 flows. But I think that was a mistake because, as I said earlier, I think that while the tool is not perfect, it is a really, really nice way to learn flows. I mean, what better way to learn flows than, you know, from the own configuration or metadata in your org? So I think the mistake for me was to not realize that. And I've seen in some online communities, some people have also dismissed this tool. But I think if you use it correctly to learn, it's incredibly powerful. So I would say that was my mistake.
I think for me, it's sort of it's an interesting question because I've been trying to, I suppose, migrate or shift over to Salesforce Flow as like my only declarative automation far too long. Decided no, I'm going to try and basically just stop using workflow rules and process as much as possible. And as you can imagine, that didn't go so well. So, look, I think what it taught me and what sort of applied here, particularly when the Migrate to Flow tool came out, is just because a tool is there and is built doesn't mean it does everything. It doesn't mean that we should sort of just blindly go out and use it without sort of putting too much thought to the consequences of doing so. So, just like trying to build everything out in Flow, well before the tool was ready. Similar to Migrate to Flow, it works. And I saw another comment actually come up and ask about is cloned, which is something you can handle in workflow rules, but processes and Flow, you can't yet. So again, just because a tool is built doesn't mean it is built to do everything or to handle every scenario. You should always be considerate and always have a plan in place. And unlike me, who gets very excited, quite often I have to really sort of hold myself back from just jumping on the tools and working away and trying to do things. I think planning is huge. Planning is absolutely everything, and using the tools that Pablo sort of demonstrated today to get a way better understanding of what your org does already have in the way of in terms of legacy automations, comparing that to what your business needs are today, because business needs change potentially faster than the automations do. So having to do a sort of a migration to Flow, really it's an opportunity for your business to go, okay, these automations that have existed for years, did they still service the way that they did back in day one? Or understanding the tools, so understanding what Flow can do versus what workflow rule and process can do, is there potentially a better way we could be doing that? So mapping out what you've got, what you need, and what the tools that you have at your disposal are, would be my biggest takeaway from some of the things I've done over the years.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a good message for everyone to be reassured by. I'm sure there's a lot of other stakeholders in the business that will just be like, okay, move faster. But actually saying this is going to benefit us all in the long term, clearing out the cobwebs, really getting control over it. So it's a lot of reassurance. And Tim, I think I met you probably end of 2019. You've been saying this all along, like flow forward.
100%.
Great. You've been educating the community about all the limitations step by step and as they've been solved. So yeah, it's been fantastic. Okay, so there was another one. There was a limit previously to the number of workflow rules you could have per object. So the person who posted the question said 50. I don't know if it depends on edition. Is this still enforced when you move them over to Flow?
So the rules and restrictions are different from one tool to the next. So with Salesforce Flow, I think one of the general restrictions that I mentioned at the beginning was that 5 active or total flows per org in the Essentials and Professional editions, which jumps. I've just sort of opened up there's a Salesforce document, the help site, which is called General Flow Limits. That basically talks about what's the maximum number of versions per flow you can have, how many elements can be executed at runtime per flow, how many active flows, and it breaks it down by different editions of Salesforce. When it comes to the flows per object, no, it's not the same sort of 50 workflow rules per object in there. So again, it really does depend on your business. If you've got 50 odd workflow rules per object, and you just hit the one button migrate, that does mean you're starting with 50 flows per object automatically. So which can be clutter. Like we sort of said, it's a chance to redesign your automations and really understand what your business wants, what are the goals, what are the outcomes and outputs that you need as a business. Potentially there may be some automations in there that don't serve you anymore, or potentially even counterproductive. So it's something you'll need to assess, and again, pull together a bit of a flow design strategy, talking about how you will approach different flow scenarios, whether it be in this case record triggered flows, or it can also help to pull together a design strategy for things like screen flows as well, and how you'll handle the user experience. So yeah, it's to answer the question, there are restrictions, they're different, and it's something you'll need to assess as a business as to how you're going to tackle your business requirements versus the technical requirements and restrictions of flow.
I think you answered that one pretty well, but Pablo, do you have anything else to add?
No, actually, I'm not really aware on the limitations. I haven't done a lot of research on how the limits compare to those of workflows, so I don't have a lot to add there, unfortunately.
That's all right. Perhaps you can, this might be like a quick answer, but someone's asked, how accurately does the standard Migrate to Flow tool work when it comes to workflow rules and process builders? Any drawbacks, apart from perhaps the obvious ones, maybe you could dig in?
Yeah, I think, well, for process builders, I think it's not enabled yet. I think that was on the timeline that we showed earlier. For workflow rules, I did notice a few times, so in flows, you have 2 ways to update a record, or the same record that triggered a flow. You could do a fast fill update, which is kind of like a before save, and then you have the standard update, which consumes a DML operation. So in many scenarios, you would use the fast fill update. And I did notice that one of the workflows that I migrated, Salesforce for some reason decided to use a standard record update, which would consume governor limits. And I didn't really see a reason why that was selected instead of the normal or the more efficient fast record update. So when you go through that exercise that I showed earlier of migrating your workflows to flows and then combining those flows, I'd say obviously don't do it blindly, right? If you're aware of the best practices of flows, like when to use which type of flow, make sure that whatever you build still aligns with that. Don't blindly just put all the 3 flows together. So I'd say it's pretty good, but that's the one thing that I noticed that was a little weird.
All right. Thank you for that. Okay, there's another one that's just come in. I was about to say there's a couple more, but there's going to be 3 more now. So when cross-object references are used in the workflow, those cannot be migrated to flows. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I can jump on that one. And this kind of ties back also to the last question that Pablo answered. So there are, as Pablo mentioned at the beginning too, things like process builder migration is not yet supported by Migrate to Flow. There have been enhancements to the Migrate to Flow tool already. And like you said, there will be features right now such as the cross object references. There's also a Salesforce help doc called Migrate to Flow Tool Considerations, and that talks about what is supported and what's not supported, and what you need to take into account when you are migrating from the legacy automations into Flow. So I'd highly suggest go have a look at that article. It's called Migrate to Flow Tool Considerations, and it's important to remember as well that these things are going to be phased out over the next couple of releases, and they are enhancing and upgrading the tool as they go. So keep an eye out on the release notes and the release note summaries that you'll see written sort of everywhere, talking about how this tool is evolving and the new features that it is supporting with each release. So I think it's the next release. I can't remember off the top of my head now. The next release they're due to include process builder migration. You'll see as well some of those things that are not yet supported with the Migrate to Flow tool with workflow rules. You'll likely see a number of those able to be sort of moved across to Flow with the next release as well.
Great. Anything to add, Pablo?
No. That's a perfect answer.
Well, thank you everybody for such positive feedback in the chat. It's really lovely to see. And well, Pablo and I, it's the afternoon, but it's quite late for Tim. I think it's getting close to 2 a.m. So this guy really loves Flow.
Very much so.
Sorry, I had a couple of other questions. So you said, when will we know if the process builder migration tool will arrive in spring 23? When will we know? Like it's rumored or scheduled for the spring 23, but when do we know that's going to be the case or not?
I think what I'd normally do, again, if you've got access to a preview org for the new release before it drops, always jump in and sort of have a bit of a play around. That's one of the first things I'll be checking when the Spring 23 preview drops. Aside from that, again, the release notes. So Flow is like the only, not only, but it's like the release notes for me is like I'll go in and see what's new in Flow, what's new with the Flow migration timeline and the Migrate to Flow tool. So the best place will be once those release notes drop, jump in and have a bit of a look around at the Migrate to Flow tool upgrades and see what's new, what's enhanced, what new capabilities that you've got. And there's also, like I know Salesforce Ben does a sort of a release notes roundup sort of thing. And a bit of a sort of a treasure hunt on new features when the new releases drop. So no doubt that big updates to the Migrate to Flow journey, I suppose, will be highlighted in those as well. If you don't want to read through the release notes, but the release notes are always fun. It's like three big, exciting things a year. Definitely jump into the release notes and you'll see that in there.
Yeah, and unless anything drastically changes, spring. Information about the spring release is normally announced middle of December for preview orgs, and then the release notes happen right before Christmas. So, although it's quite misleading, it's a big winter for us anyway. Not all the Salesforce things are backwards for you.
A little bit, yeah. It's exciting.
All right, so I think we have time for one more. So people will probably be overworked. So where do you advise one to start? Do you start small, or do you tackle your major projects first?
Sorry, Lisa, I think there's a little bit of feedback. What was that?
Yeah, apologies. So people will be feeling overwhelmed. So when you start to tackle the migration, do you start small, or do you start with your major processes first? Did you catch that?
I did. I would start small. I think one thing to be aware, and Tim, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the retirement doesn't mean that your workflows will cease to exist. I think the first thing is obviously you won't be able to create new ones. And eventually there'll be like end of support, where Salesforce support probably won't investigate issues related to workflows. But again, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that one day, or if it's going to happen, it's not going to happen anytime soon, that your workflows will just suddenly not execute. So taking that into consideration, while we do have to act now, there is also not a mad rush to migrate everything, within the next 3 months. So I would say start small. You don't want to take a big central object in your org and start migrating everything to flows. Keep in mind that for everything that you migrate, you're going to have to do some regression testing. You're going to have to check that everything that those workflows did is still happening with your new flows. So you want to probably practice a little bit with simpler, less important objects or less critical workflows in your org before tackling the complex ones. It'll also give you an opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't. As I said, sometimes the migration tool is not perfect. Um, so I don't think you want to learn those lessons with critical metadata in your org. I think you want to start with the smallest thing possible.
Yeah, well said, Pablo. I think you're exactly right there. You definitely don't want to be learning lessons on the business critical automations. That's very, very, very well said.
All right, stating the obvious. No, but it's good, because some people may think that they've got to start, and when they're thinking about flow design, they're like, okay, I'm going to grab the big processes, but it's looking at the smaller ones, I suppose, as well. Well, thank you for that. Lots of juicy information for everybody, and apologies for the echo that happened just then. I have no idea. Something spooky happening. But yes, again, this session is recorded and it will be available immediately on the Salesforce Ben YouTube channel. And thank you again to Tim and Pablo for taking out time in their days to share all this information.
It was great. Thank you for having me.
Definitely,
Thank you,
yeah.
everyone. See you next time.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.